Alright, what's going on guys? It's your boy Tony Shen. I'm back with another FL Studio melody tutorial. This is basically a series where I teach you guys how to design and just create melodies from scratch, because I feel like melodies are a very important part of making beats. Today I'm going to teach you how to make emotional piano melodies, or like realistic piano melodies for artists like Polo G, where their beats kind of just depending a lot on piano sounds. So yeah, I'm really excited to walk you guys through these melodies from scratch. I'm gonna kind of break down the steps of creating melodies like this, but before I do that, just a few updates. If you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. It really means a lot to me. In return, I'd like to hook you up with 3 of my best drum kits, Tony Shen Slap Pack Volume 1 through 3. They're all for free, and I'm giving it out. The link is in the description below. Up next, if you are a reoccurring subscriber, as you've seen on my other videos before, you know that most of them are just tutorial videos, but I'm excited to announce that I'll be posting more original content and just like original songs and plus music videos. Most likely it's gonna be on this channel. I might go through like a little bit of like a rebranding phase, but I'm gonna post more originals content on this channel, so it's just more interesting and not just tutorial videos, and it just gives me more room to experiment and stuff like that. But with that being said, let's get straight to the tutorial. First step is to find like a good piano sound. You just have to find a great realistic sounding piano. That's like the very first step. I mean, obviously you could do everything I'm doing on FL Keys, which is like the most basic like stock plugin, but it's just not gonna sound as good or as luscious as like if you used a more advanced type plugin, or like one where you have to kind of pay money for. Another plugin that's free on FL Studio is if you have Flex, they have some great essential pianos, or like a piano library. So like Stage Grand is a great piano. Steinway is pretty good. Sounds a little better than FL Keys in my opinion, but still not like the most realistic emotional piano you're gonna get. So those are like the free FL Studio pianos. Next, you're gonna move into like a more affordable type range of piano VSTs that you may have to purchase. One of them is called MIDI Grand. It's a pretty solid piano, grand piano plugin. I mean, you have like realistic, more realistic sounding ones, like the presets if you go through them, like real piano. You have, you know, ballad piano, soft. It's all solid presets considering the price of this VST. I'll link all of it in the description below, but in my opinion, it sounds a little better than the stock FL Studio pianos. Up next is a plugin that I use the most. It's called Addictive Keys. It's by XNL Audio. It's a little bit more pricier. Again, I'm gonna link the description in the below. I'm put the link in the description below. Studio Grand is the one that I have, and as you can tell, it just sounds more realistic, and just the presets are dope. I use this piano a lot for like darker type melodies. And last but not least, this one is very, very pricey, but it is one of like the industry standards when it comes to piano VSTs and keys, is Keyscape by Spectrasonics, which is the same company that makes Omnisphere. Unfortunately, I don't have this plugin as of right now yet, but I will do a review on it soon as I purchase it. If you want to spend a lot of money and invest in like great sounding piano VST, that's the one to get. But as of now, we're just gonna work with like Addictive Keys, or if you have FL Keys or Flex, like feel free to apply the next steps to that. It's gonna sound good, but just not as crisp and not as realistic as like some of these other plugins that I was talking about if you're just using stock FL Studio plugins. That's the first step. Just find a great sounding piano. Step number 2 is, once you've picked a great sounding instrument, a piano VST, now is to kind of like understand how a piano works and the applications of it. I know it sounds kind of like very basic, but I think a very common mistake we do, especially when building melodies, is that we try to overcomplicate things and add more notes than necessary, thinking that a more complex melody is gonna bring better results or gonna sound more professional or more complex, when a lot of the times simplicity is really the key, right? So what I mean is, if you think about how a piano works, you only have 2 hands, right? Realistically, if you're just playing by yourself, you have 2 hands that you can play keys with, right? And at most, I'd say you have like 2 melodies going on, one on your left hand and one on your right hand, right? So if you add like 3 layers of like 3 layers of piano melodies, or 4 layers, or just multiple different layers ranging for like 3 or 4 octaves, it just doesn't sound as realistic. And I think subconsciously, like, the listener can kind of pick up, kind of understand how a piano works, kind of understand how like certain ranges work. Like if you're playing a baseline melody and you're just jumping from like octave to octave, like realistically that's very hard for a real pianist to do. So just kind of be cautious of that and think of like, is this like a melody that a decent piano player, like great piano player, can realistically pull off? Now that we got that out of the way, let's actually go into the piano roll. We're gonna select addictive keys. We're gonna use one of the presets if you guys have it. It's just the arena ballad. It's a very basic preset, right? You don't have to do a lot of sound design for this one. First thing you want to do is kind of understand the direction in which you want your piano melody to sound. So if you want it to sound a little bit more sad, a little more dark, maybe you want to use more minor chords. Or if you want to go for something more cheerful or happy, maybe turn up the BPM a little bit and then use a major scale or progression. Since this is a Polo G type beat, he talks about very like emotional, like, you know, stuff, right? So let's focus on more like of a minor, a little bit more slow, right? So say like 135, like 130 is a great BPM to start with, maybe like 132, and then let's pull up a minor scale. Let's just think of like, you know, maybe like D minor, right? And then let's just pull that up into the piano roll. So let's go to the piano roll and then click on this button right here. And this is basically like a helper that FL Studio offers, and it allows you to pull up different scales. So like I said, we're gonna do a minor, so let's actually pull up like a can do a natural minor, or we could do a yeah, let's do a natural minor because it's easier with chords. So D, right? Now, first things first is that if I just do that right now, it's gonna play all the notes. So obviously I don't want that to sound, so let's just pull up like a sampler from FL Studio. And then copy and paste this. Command X or Control X if you're on Windows. Command V or Control V if you're on Windows. And then let's just shift drag this to like copy it. So I'm just shift drag. And then just so I have more octaves to work with, so it's easier to visualize. And then I'm just gonna pull this for like 4 bars, right? And then now that we go back to addictive keys, we can see all of the notes that are placed on the sampler, so you know where to place your notes. And if you don't see this, all you have to do is go to helpers and then enable ghost channels. So that'll allow you to see all the notes in your other patterns. So now that we have this, we can start designing our melody. So in terms of like piano and a lot of like more popular piano, like in popular like rap, trap music, a lot of times it's based around like a certain chord progression, right? So we can kind of start a chord progression by just focusing on certain chords and focusing. So we can kind of like, and I know this is kind of like going more into music theory and it could get a little bit complicated, but just bear with me. If you just follow along with these few steps, you'll have enough understanding to kind of like experiment with your own chords. So first chord that is always just good to have is like, if you're in a D minor scale, the first chord would be like a D minor chord, right? Or like a D minor triad chord. So one of the most common ways to build a chord is just using the first note, the third note, and the fifth note. So the first note in D minor is just D, right? You start on D and you count from D. So first is D, second is and then so you need the first, the 3, and the 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, that's a 3, and 4, 5, 1, 3, and 5, your D minor chord, right? And then next step is to kind of just jump around the scale and then find different notes of the scale, and then same idea. Just use the 1, the 3, and the 5. So these are just your triad chords that you're just bouncing around the scale. So maybe, you know, go to C and then same thing, 1, 3, and 5. And then the next note, maybe, you know, pick a G, right? So from D minor to a G to G, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then maybe E, 2, 3. So again, 2, 3, 4. And then maybe jump to like an E. So just root note is E, so that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just count from the 1 that you set and then count the 3 and the 5, and that's a triad. And then, I don't know, just pick another note, right? Just experiment with different notes. So maybe an A, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now you have a very basic chord progression, and then think of this as like your left hand, right? Your left hand, you're gonna have like, you're gonna be able to play your lower notes or your mid notes, and that leaves your right hand with the role of playing like a melody that accompanies the chords. This one is where you can be more creative as long as it fits with the chord, and it's more of like a guess and check type thing. Like, okay, I'm gonna think of one melody and does it work with this chord, right? And it helps to sing in your head a little bit too, right? Yeah, sounds pretty good, right? And then maybe you want to add more variation within the same pattern. So just highlight, shift, drag, that copies it, and then just maybe change certain notes up in the second time. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. Sounds pretty good, but the left hand kind of sounds just kind of boring, right? You're kind of just hitting one chord and then sustaining the entire chord for the entire beat. It could be cool. It's a very basic chord progression, and it could be useful. You could use it and add drums to it and then just make the beat out of it. But if you want to spice this melody up just a little bit, I'm going to teach you a really cool trick to kind of just make the rhythm and the bounce of your melody sound a lot more interesting. So instead of just hitting all of your notes at once on your left-hand side with your chords, like I'm doing right now, you could play them one at a time, right? And that is going to create more of a rhythmic element to your chord progression. So what I mean is, instead of playing all of them at the same time on the one, maybe stagnate them a little bit. Another thing you could do to spice up your left-hand side with the chord progression side is to add transition notes, right? So here, instead of just holding this chord, maybe add like a C here to transition into the next chord progression. And then here, maybe do another stagnated. Same thing here. Boom. And then maybe add another note. Maybe add a C. Yeah, you never know. I mean, honestly, if you just spend a decent amount of time after you make your initial chord progression and just experiment with adding different notes, half of the time, a lot of the times, you're going to find that it makes the melody more interesting, or if it doesn't, just go back to it, right? It's just a very experimental stage. Again, transition notes. This melody already conveys more emotion than like what we did like 5 minutes ago with just holding the chords, right? So that definitely made it more interesting. Now it's more of like, how do I make it sound more human? If you think of like a piano player, it doesn't matter how good of a piano player that person is, They could spend their entire lives training on piano. They're never going to get it perfectly on time with the grid, right? Like actually a good piano player, the time is going to be a little offset, but it's going to have direction in the timing, right? So it's never going to be perfectly aligned to the grid like we have right now. If it's too perfect, that's like a dead giveaway that you played all of this on a piano roll and it's not like a real piano, right? Which could be off-putting sometimes. So what you want to do is kind of offset the timing of each of these notes a little bit. Now you could do it manually. So just highlight whatever note and then just hold shift and then drag back and forth. Like that's for sure an option, and you could do for all those notes manually. But there's a more lazier and automated way where you can offset the timing that I like to do when I don't want to like manually drag all these notes. If you hold Option S or Alt S on Windows, you can open up the Seinnheiser tool, which allows you to kind of offset the timing and give it more of a strumming motion. Now this isn't like perfectly, doesn't give you that much control, but it does offset the timing a little bit, and it just makes it sound more interesting. So if you just, after applying that, let's just, like here, right here, sounds more realistic, right? Sounds more interesting. Another thing is, even professional piano players, when they hit the notes, they're never going to hit every single note at the same exact velocity. No matter how good their finger control is, no matter how much they practice, it's just never going to happen, right? So another thing you can do is randomize the velocity of each of those notes. So Option R or Alt R if you're on Windows, and then let's go to the velocity. And then as you can see, if you drag this knob, you can offset, you can just randomize the velocity a little bit. So just do that for a little bit and then hit accept, and then instantly the loudness of each individual note is going to be slightly different from the other, and that just makes it sound, again, more human and more realistic. Pretty interesting, right? So that's step 3, which is understanding which direction you want to take your melody to, and then applying that by first building the chords and then adding the melodies. I know step 3 is a pretty long step, and it's the most comprehensive step, and like if you skip every part of the video, step 3 is the one thing that you shouldn't really skip, because that's like kind of like the meat and potatoes of the video. But after that, there's step 4, which is to just adjust and mix and add effects, right? Let's go here. Let's go to first EQ. Just like basic mixing, right? Like you don't, like you're most likely gonna have an 808 with like a bass playing. So if you want to cut out some of the lower ends, so just so that the bass doesn't clash, that's always a plus for mixing. Another thing is, maybe add reverb just to give it more environment. You could use the default FL Studio reverb too, which I'm gonna use right now. Just a subtle amount of reverb, because this sound by itself already has some reverb, so you don't want to like drench it. And another thing you want to add, that I like to add, is maybe some type of like a tape saturation, or like some type of thing that to make it sound more analog-y. Just because like realistically, when you're recording a piano, like you're probably going to record it with a mic, and it probably goes through some type of like an analog process, maybe some compressors, maybe some like saturation, maybe some like hiss, stuff like that. It's a very small detail, it's a very subtle detail, but if FL Studio unfortunately doesn't have like a one of those like tape saturation plugins to make it sound more analog-y, but there are some great alternatives. Like if you have Isotope Vinyl, that's a great plugin to use, and in my case, Sketch Cassette is like one of my favorite plugins to use. You can add a little bit of hiss, or you can just not use it, and then just make it sound like it's coming out of a tape. A little saturation. It's a very subtle effect, but it just brings it out a little bit more and makes it sound more analog-y and recorded and just more authentic, right? So that's step 4, very quick step. Add some quick effects to just bring out the sound a little bit more, make it sound more environment-y, make it sound better with other instruments playing by EQing. Now all you have to do is add the drums, which is step 5, and add all the accompanying parts. So today I'm just gonna kind of like just work on the drums real quick, very quick, So to add drums, I'm just gonna put the pattern on the playlist. So just click that, put it on the playlist, and then I might just drag in a loop because I'm too lazy to make my own drums. This is from Cymatics. And then maybe, just do basic, just tune your 808, obviously, right? C, are we good? It's already tuned to C as a root note. And then maybe just get rid of the sampler so you can see the actual melody, and then just follow on the bass line of the melody. That's usually how I work with my 808s, just follow the bass note. All right, there you go. Now you have a Polo G type melody. So now, if you follow all the steps, you should have a Polo G piano type melody. It should sound very realistic. It should go really well with the drums. And I don't know, who knows? You might, land a placement with Polo G or whatever. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for the support. If you're new to this channel and you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button. Again, grab my drum kit. It's in the description below. It's free for you guys to get. And then keep up with this channel if you're returning. If you want to see some of my original music with different artists that I'm working with right now in LA, in my studio in downtown LA. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.